Hello guys, this is the last part of the lecture of Diglossia. We are going to see the difference between Ferguson's Diglossia and Fishman's extended Diglossia. But before this, let's just have a recap of what Diglossia is for Fishman, or for Ferguson first, sorry. He states that by the end of his article in 1959, he states that Diglossia is a relatively stable language situation in which, in addition to the primary dialects of the language, just let's focus point by point and part by part. Diglossia refers to a linguistic situation that is or that exists in a given speech community or in a given society or any community. So it is a linguistic situation in which, in addition to the primary dialects of the language, which means in addition or besides the dialects that are spoken in current life, in ordinary life, in conversational situations, and in, let's say, in informal context and in daily conversations between people and members of this speech community. So, in addition to those dialects, be them regional dialects, social dialects, or regional standards, in addition to these, there is another variety. So in addition to those varieties, well, what he called the low variety, there is another variety which is very divergent. So it is distinct and it is highly codified. And when we talk about codification, we should talk about standardization and grammar, often grammatically more complex, and we see that the grammatical structure and richness of the high variety or the standard language. It is also a superposed variety, and when we talk about a superposed variety, we talk about prestige, and that is the prestige associated and the value given to this high variety or to the other variety, which is the standard language. It is also the vehicle of a large and respected body of written literature, either in an earlier period or in another speech community. And when we talk about the body of written literature, we talk about literary heritage. We talk about written books, poetry, and art that is found in this language or in the standard language or in the high variety. And then this language is also learned largely by formal education. And when we talk about formal education, we talk about the process or the criterion of acquisition, that the high variety is acquired in schools by children, whereas the low variety is not acquired, but rather is not acquired in schools or in formal education, but rather it just learns naturally from the members of the family and from the surroundings, and is used for most written and formal spoken purposes. And when we mentioned the purposes of the use of a language or a variety, we mentioned the function, which is also a criterion of difference between high and lower varieties. So the high variety is used in formal spoken or written, which means we have, or it is used in formal context, be that written or spoken. And with the exception that it is not used by any sector of the community for ordinary conversation, which means that he made it clear that in any speech community there is, or in some speech communities, not to generalize, in some speech communities there are or there can be a linguistic situation where there exist two varieties of the same language exhibiting or employing or exercising different roles or play different jobs in this community, where there are certain contexts where the first one can be used and the other one cannot be used, as for example, he mentioned formal education versus ordinary conversation. formal context versus informal or casual context. So like this, when we use a variety in a given context, it is automatically not going to be used or sometimes subject to ridicule if it's going to be used in the opposite context. Let's say for someone using standard Arabic at home in order to, let's say, saying ناولني الخبز instead of أعطيني الخبز, then that's quite ridiculous. Why? Because the context does not entail the use of standard Arabic in an ordinary context or in a casual conversation. So like this, Ferguson has made the distinction between two varieties of the same language exhibiting different functions and different roles in the speech community. Now, afterwards, this is after the spread of this article, and as it was something new at that time, many critiques came as a reaction to or a refinement to Ferguson's diglossia, as sometimes or in some situations, in some contexts, in some speech communities, we do not find this. Like, we cannot find two varieties of the same language exhibiting or showing different roles or playing different roles in the community or in the speech of the members of this community. Like, we do not find two varieties of the same language where one is standard, the other one is dialect, and they are used in different social contexts. However, there are some situations in some contexts, in some speech communities, where we do not find two varieties of one language having different roles, but two languages having different roles in the speech community, and they work for and they apply all the functions or the criteria of difference that have been established by Ferguson as making the distinction between high and low varieties apply not on varieties of the same language, but on languages of which are distinct in origins or which are historically distinct or historically divergent. Like this, Fishman, who is another sociolinguist or a linguist, was interested in some critiques of Fishman's or Ferguson's diglossia. He came by the year 1967. You can follow with me in the documents given on the platform. By 1967, Ferguson's original concept had undergone some changes when Fishman refined the definition, arguing that is, he refined it. He adds something. That is, there were some inappropriate things in the definition of diglossia, so they were subject to refinements, to a slight change in the definition made by Fishman. He states that, or he argues that, diglossia can also be extended to cover situations where two or more unrelated or at least historically distant language varieties are used for different functions. Let's just focus on this. This idea is very important. Diglossia can be extended, that is, it is not only limited to varieties of the same language, but can be extended, that is, it can go beyond those varieties of the same language to other situations, other circumstances, other linguistic contexts where two or more unrelated or historically distant language varieties or languages. That is, we are no more concerned or no more limited to two varieties of one language, but also to unrelated or historically very distant languages or language varieties that are used for different functions. Which means, if let's say for example, if in the Arab world we have standard Arabic as the high variety, and all the other dialects are used as lower varieties. For Ferguson, standard Arabic and older dialects spoken in the Arab world, such as Algerian Arabic, Moroccan Arabic, Tunisian Arabic, Egyptian Arabic, and so forth, all of them, they are lower varieties. Both varieties, the high and the low, they are related, belong to the same origin. They are historically similar. They belong to the same mother. They belong to the same language family. However, for Fishman, we do not, or we are not only limited to this, that is, languages that are from the same family or that are tightly related, but rather we can extend this to languages which are not related or varieties which come from different languages. Likewise, or like this, he talks about it, or he mentioned it as an extended diglossia. Like, diglossia was limited to or restricted to varieties of the same language, and he extended it to two or more unrelated languages or distant language varieties that can be used for different functions. If Ferguson states that the standard variety or the high variety is used for a given function, a low variety is used in another or for another function. On the other hand, Fishman has stated that high and low varieties are not only limited to standard and vernacular, but can also be extended to other varieties of the same language, where one can play the high variety, the other one can be the low variety. This is why he stated that they can be two or more unrelated languages or language varieties for different functions. This is, he kept the term function like the central or the cornerstone of the definition has remained the same, which is the function. In the definition of diglossia, the central point or the central thing is function. That two or more varieties have different functions. They have different jobs, let's say, different roles to play in the speech community. One can be used for a given function or given role and in a given context. The other one is used for another function to play another role and in a distinct context, while the other one cannot be used. Alright?